This is one of the intermediate or the early models, and I was stripping this down to service it. I decided that I didn't want to take the leatherette off the bottom. I looked at the leatherette and it appeared to be particularly well stuck, and I know from experience that the leatherette, when it's well stuck on these bodies with the black edges, it's very difficult to get that leatherette off in one piece. So I thought it wasn't worth the likelihood of creating a lot of damage to completely strip it. So I removed all my film advance mechanism from the top, and with a view to cleaning and lubricating things as much as I could. I was still left with some stiffness in the action of the film advance. So I took the lever off with a view to getting in here and seeing if I needed to put any lubrication on the little ratchet pieces round here. But when I look in there, and I think you can possibly see it, in this position here, you can see a screw lying on its side. Now that'll be one of the 3 screws that holds the film advance lever into the, or shaft into the body. And one of them is backed out of the hole completely, so now it's sitting loose in there, and every time this is rotated, that screw is banging and crashing over all the little dents and holes and things in there. So I've got to remove this loose screw, rotate this round so I can see which hole it came out of, and then put it back in place, hopefully. Most likely the other 2 screws are also loose. They hardly ever work their way out loose all by themselves. So that's what I'm doing. So let me see if I can get this screw out of that hole. There's the screw. There it is. It's come out, and I can put that back in place now from wherever it came from. Let's see if I can rotate this. May have to swing the release lever back. I'm doing that by just turning this with my fingers at the top, swinging it away from in contact with this lever, and I can see now that it's come out of this position here. That's empty. And the screw head is very, very damaged. That screw's been in there getting munched up for some time. So I'm going to find a screw in my spares. That screw is incredibly damaged. I'll find a screw in my spare parts here, because I've got a few pieces from that parts camera that I took apart. So doubtless there's a screw here that I can use. Yes, there's a good example. So I'll drop that in, and I expect it'll screw straight in, because there's no special reason to think that the female thread in there would have been damaged in any way. And I'll check these other 2 screws and see if they're loose. If I can get my screwdriver in there. Yeah, that one was slightly loose. That one was quite loose. And I'll just tighten up this one I've replaced. Now that will probably move quite smoothly now. While I'm in here, I will apply some synthetic grease around the little ratchet positions round here, and that'll transfer through on the end of the release lever. All I can do then is wind up my tension on this and then get my advance lever back in place. Well, it's an interesting one. It was a puzzle to me what was happening there, why it was so rough and lumpy feeling, and I really wasn't expecting to find that. That screw is just ruined. So it's probably been like that for a long, long time. Okay, well, I thought I'd show you that. That's just one of the odd things that you can find, and I don't expect this is I think that most likely that this will do the job for me nicely. I'm just applying a bit of that synthetic grease onto those ratchet positions. And then I've got to just find some tension onto this film advance. Of course, it's lost it completely. I'm not entirely sure what position this is currently sitting in. I think it's sitting in the neutral position, to tell the truth. So if I swing that release lever out of the way and wind a full turn of tension on here, I should be should be right. I think I'm right in that position, but I'm just going to go and get a advance lever. In fact, I've got one here, and I can just check to see what position I've got that in. Okay, so it's sitting in that, it was sitting in that orientation, which was not the correct spot. I need it to be round from there. I'm going to put a little mark on there so I know where I'm turning it to. And what I want to achieve is basically a full turn of tension. Right, where's a pen? And I'll just wipe the grease off that surface. And what I want is it sitting in that orientation, where this square rectangular clearance is here. That's where the lock lever would go on a Retina 3C. And here is where our release lever drops in. So if I've got it in that orientation, with this pointing towards the midline of the camera, I should be right. So I've just got to copy that onto here. So it's a bit difficult seeing where this is situated at the moment. I'm just comparing this. Yeah, I've got it sitting in that orientation at the moment. So I want, that's the piece that I want running in this direction over here. All right. Now I know where I'm going. All I've got to do is get there. So, by grasping the release lever up here and rotating it anti-clockwise and holding it there, that basically swings that release lever out of contact. Here's a release lever. Basically that's sitting in the camera like that, and I'm swinging it away so that it's no longer in contact with the film advance, with the top of the film advance lever here. I'm swinging it away so I'm free to rotate this. And then I can drop it back into play. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, it's a bit awkward, my hand doesn't want to sit in that position. Let's just do this. So that is probably the neutral position, and if I go a full turn from there, be round to about there. Now my release lever is sitting in position at that point. It hasn't sprung out of place and unwound. So if I get a couple of screws in here, I'm done. And we can check the action of the film advance. That'll do. I'll put the third one on in a minute. But that should do it. So now if I press the release, the film advance, it's not springing back up. Is that lever sitting flat? It's not springing back up as smoothly as I'd expect it to. Let me get that third screw in there. That film advance lever might not be sitting dead flat there. It's certainly not just popping up as I'd expect it to. There's not much tension on that spring, and I wonder whether that adjustment was correct. Let's just wind a bit of tension on there. That's what it was. There wasn't enough tension on that spring. It's likely that the adjustment of that screw was incorrect. Alright, well that's that little mystery solved, and I can get round to cleaning the other components and putting them back in. That was an unusual fault. I didn't really expect to find that. I thought it was worth showing you that one. With everything out of the body, I'm left to look at the state of the leatherettes. And the leatherettes, as you can see on that back, that's ice bumpy. The pieces on the front, I can't tell whether they're loose or not. If they'll lift off easily, I'll get them off. And if they won't, they can stay there. The camera has obviously been somewhere humid at some stage, and corrosion is set up underneath the leatherettes. Yeah, that leatherette came off very easily, and here you can see the corrosion products on the leatherette, so that'll certainly need to be cleaned up. Let's get the one on this side as well. Now these leatherettes, on the front at least, appear to be in quite good order. If they were very brittle and fragile, I might choose to leave them entirely alone. Yeah, that's just popping straight off, again because of the corrosion underneath the leatherette. That only leaves the leatherette on the camera back. Let's see if that'll come off in a similar way. The leatherette here is quite dirty too at the end. The leatherettes on the back are always stuck much firmer on those corners. Anywhere there's a sharp edge, the leatherettes tend to be stuck very well there. And less so on flat areas. If I can get this peeled up very gently, level enough that I can get my scalpel underneath it, and I'm using the scalpel to lever the leatherette up more than, I'm not cutting underneath it if you like, I'm using the scalpel blade to lever it up, or acting as a wedge. Okay, it's firm there. Now you can see this filth coming off here, that's aluminium salts probably, corrosion products. Yeah, it's a bit firmer down here towards the end. You have to go much slower. Don't fold the leatherette back hard, you'll end up cracking it. You keep a gentle curve in it when you're lifting it up, because even if it doesn't crack in half and cause you a real bother, the likelihood of it having a crease on it that will not come out later is very high. Okay, so it's mostly stuck in that lower corner there. Okay, it's off. And you can see all this stuff here. That's all corrosion products. That's all got to come off. And the same on the camera back. All of this stuff is sort of, it's got a greasy feel to it as well. Now, whether that's a breakdown product of the adhesive, I don't know. So I'm just using the back edge of my scalpel blade here to scrape that rubbish off, get rid of the vast bulk of it. And of course I'll have to do the same with the leatherettes. Get all those lumps and bumps scraped off there. Some of these points, like here, those little white spots, that's where the corrosion was most pronounced. That's where we'll have a Zeiss bump in those positions. So if I can get that rubbish out from those little hollows, there's a reasonable chance that I can get the leatherette glued back down and very hopefully get those bumps to disappear. Here, where the bumps have been there for a long time, because they stick up, they get abraded more than the rest of the leatherette, and as a result they'll have lost their gloss or their finish on the tops of the bumps, and in severe cases they'll actually crack, and there'll be cracks in the tops of those bumps, which of course you can't do much about, but they can be heavily disguised once the leatherette's glued back down. Well, as you can see, I've got the leatherette back on the body. Those two front panels look pretty good. And the camera back, well, you can see that we've done away with the Zeiss bumps. They've pretty much gone completely. So I'm very pleased with that result. So here I have two Retinette type 022 cameras. One is a very early example, serial number 301293, and the other one is a slightly later example. This is the next earliest one I have, serial number 314977. Now, the earliest example, you can see a screw head poking up here. Now that's a normal screw. On the later cameras in the main production, we have a headless screw, a grub screw, serving that purpose. So the early camera, they had a plain screw there, one with a pan head on it. So that's the difference in the earliest examples. Otherwise the bodies look much the same, but there is a difference in the castings. The castings have different numbers on them. The earliest example here, with the screw on it, the casting number here is number 2. And on the later example I have here, the casting is number 3. So presumably those numbers refer to the mould, these being die cast. I don't know how that process works. The later camera, casting number 3, this patch here, which would support the rangefinder in a Retina 3C camera, for example, is completely flat. There's no ridge at the back. The early example, casting 2, has this ridge at the back, which is normally what I would push the rangefinder back against before I tighten the screws up on a 3C camera. So we certainly have a difference there in the earliest example I have and the more mainstream production from further on. But that wasn't the only difference I discovered. In the camera body, we have these 2 posts sticking out here. This is the cocking post, and this one here is the shutter release post. And I think you can see there that they're reduced diameter at the front, and the D shape here appears to have been created by machining this piece, drilling a hole down the centre, putting a former in there, presumably a D, something D-shaped, and then crushing this down to create that D shape there. It's a fairly simple thing. That's the way I presume that they were all done in production. But here we have the pieces from the earliest camera, and these were created a completely different way. What they've done here is this has been turned in the normal fashion. They have made a saw cut through the top, and then they have squashed the end of it down so that the whole end of this is vaguely D-shaped, creating this flat top for the D section here. So this has been created in quite a different way. Now both pieces here, both the shutter release section and the cocking section, have been created in that same fashion. There's a saw cut running through, and then it's been crushed down to leave the D-shaped section. When it was crushed down, judging by how flat the top of that D section is, it has been created by putting the D-shaped shaft in there, a D-shaped shaft there, and then crushing down onto it so that it's left that quite flat at the top there as a result. But there's certainly a difference there. Now the earliest example here, because that is relatively open, you might say, because of the cut, there must be a fairly limited amount of strength in that, and it would have required more work too. I imagine that they abandoned that fairly well. I would only expect to see this sort of behaviour in a prototype, really. I mean, it's just too much like hard work and too dodgy looking in a result for it to be useful as a production technique. But this was quite an early example. As I say, this was 301293. So it's quite an early, I think the serial numbers probably started at 300000, or close to it. So it's an early example, but the pieces they used there, that was obviously something that they got away from fairly promptly. I haven't noticed any other prompt changes in the, or changes in the way these have been manufactured, but we might find out more later. Here's the shutter from that earliest Retinette that I had here, the 301293 serial number one. And I'm working on the shutter now. One thing I did notice was that the serial number of the shutter is very clearly engraved on the case there. And the next thing I noticed was that we have this lever. This is the lever that prevents you from being able to depress the shutter release if the shutter's not cocked. That's certainly a feature that was absent on later production. I'm just looking at the rest of the shutter to see if there's anything else unusual here. I'm not immediately seeing anything that catches my eye, but time will tell. Now the main spring here is somewhat tired looking, but notice one of the things I've noticed is that this tab at this end is not clipped into the bracket here. It is sitting right on the end of it. It's not pushed into the slot. I think that slot's not wide enough for it. And for some reason or another, this spring doesn't really want to lift off the main cam. Let's lift the cam out and see if I can find out. There it is, it's out now. Alright, the little downward leg on this spring is bent back much more than usual, so it was pretty much hooked into the main cam. Normally it just drops in. There's usually very little hook on that. Okay. I'll carry on taking this apart, back if I find anything else interesting. This is the main spring. The coil's a little bit higgledy-piggledy. This thing is not wound as neat and tightly as they normally are. The whole spring looks slightly distorted. It doesn't look like it's tired. It's fairly average in terms of how lacking in tension it looks, but what strikes me here is that it's quite distorted. There's this top coil in particular, the top couple of coils aren't lying dead flat at all. So I'm not sure whether they were having trouble producing good springs right at the beginning, this being a very early example, or that's just some random artefact. Perhaps someone has been in here servicing this before and they've done something naughty to that spring. I suppose we'll never know. That bracket that I mentioned that the spring didn't hook into correctly, I was able to take my scalpel blade and lever that tab up slightly so that the spring does hook in there correctly now. So at least the spring would be correctly located at that point. But apart from that, I see nothing exciting here. This is just a tired and dirty shutter in need of a service.